Well, I take full responsibility for employing Andy Coulson. I did so on the basis of undertakings I was given by him about phone hacking, and those turn out not to be the case. I always said that if they turned out to be wrong, I would make a full and frank apology, and I do that today. I'm extremely sorry that I employed him. It was the wrong decision, and I'm very clear about that. We covered all this in the Leveson inquiry. I asked him questions about if he knew about phone hacking, and he said that he didn't, and I accepted those assurances, and I gave him the job. I would say that no one has made any complaints about the work that he did for me, either as leader of the opposition or indeed here in number 10 Downing Street. But knowing what I now know, and knowing that those assurances weren't right, it was obviously wrong to employ him. I gave someone a second chance, and it turned out to be a bad decision.
Well, my thoughts today are most importantly with the victims of phone hacking, who suffered terrible intrusion into their privacy and suffering as a result of the criminal offences that were perpetrated. I think David Cameron has very, very serious questions to answer, because we now know that he brought a criminal into the heart of Downing Street. And David Cameron was warned about Andy Coulson. The evidence mounted up against Andy Coulson. David Cameron must have had his suspicions about Andy Coulson, and yet he refused to act. Now, I believe this isn't just a serious error of judgment. This taints David Cameron's government, because we now know that he put his relationship with Rupert Murdoch ahead of doing the right thing when it came to Andy Coulson. This was not some small or accidental mistake. He stuck with Andy Coulson over a long period of time, and it wasn't like there wasn't information out there to arouse his suspicions. He was warned by the Deputy Prime Minister. He saw front page stories in newspapers. He was warned by newspaper editors, and yet still he refused to act. And even today, defending some of the conduct of Andy Coulson when he worked for him. Now look, I think David Cameron must do much more than an apology. He owes the country an explanation for why he did not act. Why he did not act on these allegations against Andy Coulson. Why, as the evidence piled up, he didn't do anything about it. And he's got to explain. It's one thing to say that when Andy Coulson was originally appointed, David Cameron talked to him, but there was a lot more information that came out month after month, year after year, including when Andy Coulson was appointed to Downing Street. And then there's a whole set of questions about the kind of security clearance that Andy Coulson received, because he doesn't seem to have received the most comprehensive security vetting and clearance. We need to know why that didn't happen. And we just need to know this sort of fundamental, basic question, which is, if, as these months were going by and more evidence was mounting, why didn't David Cameron act? Why didn't he seek an investigation into these allegations against Andy Coulson? Why did he stick by him? We know why he stuck by him, because he was more interested in his relationship with the press than he was in doing the right thing by the public interest. That's why his government is a tainted government.
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. The first thing is that we should remember the victims, people who had their privacy wrecked, and we should ensure that that cannot happen again. As we do so, we must, as he says, cherish a free and vibrant press in our country. Now, I said yesterday, and I say again today, I take full responsibility for employing Andy Coulson. I did so on the basis of assurances that I received, but also the Select Committee received. But I always said if those assurances turned out to be wrong, I would apologise fully and frankly to this House of Commons, and I do so again today from this dispatch box. I am sorry, this was the wrong decision. but I think it's right that we've had a public inquiry in this country, and it's right that we have proper investigations. Yesterday, once again, showed that no one is above the law in our country.
Mr. Speaker, today we know that for 4 years, the Prime Minister's hand-picked closest advisor was a criminal and brought disgrace to Downing Street. We now also know that the Prime Minister willfully ignored multiple warnings about him. On the 8th of July 2009, The Guardian published evidence of phone hacking on an industrial scale while Andy Coulson was editor of the News of the World. At that time, Andy Coulson was his Director of Communications. What action did he take?
Well, as I said a moment ago, the assurances I sought and received were the same assurances received by the Press Complaints Commission, by a select committee of this House, and by police investigations. They were also thoroughly gone into by the Leveson inquiry, an inquiry he supported specifically, and he talks about warnings. Specifically on the warning from The Guardian, Leveson had to say this: the editor of The Guardian did not raise the issue with Mr. Cameron at meetings, both in the month after the article was published and the following year. And he says this, and honourable members want to hear: there can be no criticism of Mr. Cameron for not raising the issue. We had an exhaustive inquiry. I know he didn't like the result of the inquiry, but he should accept it.
Mr. Speaker, that is a long-winded way of saying that when it came to Andy Coulson, he just didn't want to know the evidence. First warning ignored. Let's move on to May 2010. The Deputy Prime Minister warned him in person about his deep concerns about Andy Coulson. So he was warned by his deputy. What action did he take?
Every single one of these issues was dealt with by the Leveson inquiry.
Order. Mr. Lucas, calm yourself. I am trying to offer you on a weekly basis therapeutic guidance. But there's a long way to go. There needs to be calm on both sides of the House. The Prime Minister.
Every single one of these issues was dealt with exhaustively by the Leveson inquiry. The terms of reference of the Leveson inquiry were agreed by the Right Honourable Gentleman, and they included, I quote, the extent to which there was a failure to act on previous warnings about media misconduct. That is what Leveson looked into. He looked into all of these questions about the warnings I was given and the response I gave, and he made no criticism of my conduct. Now, I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman was disappointed by the Leveson inquiry, but he called for it, it took place, and he should heed what it said.
No, Mr. Speaker. This is about his character, his judgment, and the warnings he ignored, including from the Deputy Prime Minister. Warning number 2 ignored. Then in September 2010, the New York Times published a front-page investigation detailing Andy Coulson's extensive knowledge of phone hacking, including one former editor who said, "I've been to dozens, if not hundreds, of meetings with Andy when the subject came up." What action did he take?
All of these issues, every single warning, was dealt with by the Leveson inquiry. An inquiry he called for, an inquiry whose terms of reference he agreed, and I know he can't bear it, but Leveson made no criticism of my conduct in this regard whatsoever. Now, you cannot call for a judge-led inquiry, participate in a judge-led inquiry, write the terms of reference of a judge-led inquiry, and then ignore what it has to say. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, all of the questions he's raising today are not new. They're the questions dealt with by the Leveson inquiry. I know.
The Prime Minister is offering an answer, and it must be heard. Order! It must be heard by the House. Both sides must be heard by the House, and that will happen as it always does, however long this session has to be run. About that, let us be absolutely clear. The Prime Minister.
I can quite understand why he doesn't want to listen to an 8-month-long inquiry that cost £5 million, that interviewed people under oath, that was led by a judge, but that is what he asked for, that is what was delivered, and it did not criticise my conduct in this regard at all. So instead of casting aspersions about that, he should accept the inquiry that he supported.
No answer on any of the questions. No answer why he didn't act on The Guardian. No answer why he didn't act on the Deputy Prime Minister. No answer why he didn't act on the New York Times. Now let's come to the issue of vetting, Mr. Speaker. Amidst all of those warnings, the very least he should have...
Order. I apologise for interrupting the right honourable gentleman. There is the usual ranting from the usual suspects. Be quiet, or if you can't be quiet and you haven't got that level of self-restraint, leave the chamber. We can perfectly well manage without you. Mr. Ed Miliband.
Now let's come to the issue of vetting, Mr. Speaker. Amidst all of those warnings, the very least he should have done is insisted immediately on coming to office that Andy Coulson should have the highest level of security vetting as his 6 predecessors over the previous 14 years had had. Why didn't he insist on it?
Again, Leveson, in his inquiry, looked directly into this issue. And this, Mr. Speaker, and this is what he found. And this is what he found. Leveson concluded this: the level of security clearance was not the decision of either Mr. Cameron or Mr. Coulson. It was the decision of the civil service. And those are the correct procedures. And those are the correct procedures. But if the leader of the opposition's contention is that direct vetting would have got to the bottom of Mr. Coulson's conduct at the News of the World, then he should be very clear about what Leveson found. And he found this. The process of considering Mr. Coulson for DV status would not have involved a detailed investigation of phone hacking at the News of the World. That undermines the entire case that Labour have been trying to make all morning. I know you don't agree with it. I know that he is so desperate not to talk about the economy, not to talk about unemployment, not to talk about the deficit, but you can't rerun an inquiry that's already taken place.
Mr. Speaker, so now it is clear from the Prime Minister, I'll tell them what's weak. It's failing to stand up for doing the right thing, and that is what this Prime Minister has done. So now we know the rule of this Prime Minister is the buck doesn't stop here, and he blames the civil service. Now on the civil service,
Sometimes one has to repeat a thing because people don't get it first time. If there is quiet, we will continue. If people try to shout other people down against the principles of British democracy, they will be stopped in their tracks. It's very simple, and I would have thought pretty clear. Ed Miliband.
On the civil service, can he assure the House that at no time did Sir Gus O'Donnell, the then Cabinet Secretary, or any senior civil servant raise concerns with him or his office about hiring Andy Coulson?
What the honourable gentleman is trying to do is go through all of the old questions that were answered by the Leveson inquiry. He didn't like the answer because he wanted to try and prove some cooked-up conspiracy between the Conservatives and News International. He cannot manage to do it because the Leveson inquiry can't find it. Now, he asked a minute ago, what is weak? I'll tell you what is weak. Attacking Murdoch and then standing up with a copy of the Sun newspaper, only to apologise a few hours later.
has been a complex and challenging investigation which has culminated in a trial lasting almost 8 months. 5 people had already pleaded guilty before the trial started. They pleaded guilty to serious criminal offences. Throughout this investigation, we have done our best to follow the evidence without fear or favour. We were acutely conscious of the sensitivities of investigating a newspaper and people employed by a newspaper, and inevitably dealing with confidential journalistic material. This investigation has never been about an attack on press freedom, but rather establishing who may have committed criminal offences, what, if any, those criminal offences are. We were then determined to ensure that justice was done. Victims deserve no less. I do hope that the verdicts and the guilty pleas will be of some small comfort to the victims, and they will feel that justice has been done. Those found not guilty have been exonerated after a thorough police investigation and a fair trial. It was right that the issues were aired in a court of law. There are other cases yet to be heard, and as a consequence, I regret that I am unable to say anything further. I will, however, thank our senior investigating officer and his team for their integrity and professionalism throughout, and also, of course, the Crown Prosecution Service and the prosecution team for all their support. Thank you very much.
Of course, the last few years have been tough for both of us and for those closest to us. But more importantly, they've been tough for everybody on all sides that have been affected by the issues highlighted by this case. And therefore, throughout the 3-year police investigation and through our 8-month trial at the Old Bailey, we've always tried to keep our troubles in perspective. I mean, after all, you know, we have a happy and healthy daughter. We have our brave and resolute mums that have been at court most of the time, and we've had strong and unwavering support from all our friends, our family, and from our legal teams that have believed in us from the beginning. I am innocent of the crimes that I was charged with, and I feel vindicated by the unanimous verdicts.
What's your reaction? What's your message to Andy, Mrs. Brooks? What's your message to Andy Coulson tonight?
When I was arrested, it was in the middle of a maelstrom of controversy, of politics and of comment. Some of that was fair, but much of it was not. So I'm grateful for the jury. I'm very grateful for the jury for coming to their decision.
What's your reaction to the extent of criminality that has been exposed at the 2 papers you worked at, Mrs. Brooks?
I think I'd like to say it's been a time of reflection for me. I've learnt some valuable lessons, and hopefully I'm the wiser for it.
Do you wish you had done more to expose the criminality, Mrs. Brooks? Do you wish you had done more to expose the criminality?
I think that said, I'm incredibly proud of the many journalists I've worked with throughout my career and the great campaigns that we have fought and won.
But do you wish you'd done more? As Chief Executive, do you wish you had done more to expose the criminality?
And all I can say to you all is that Today, my thoughts are with my former colleagues and their families who face future trials. I'm going to do everything I can to support them, as I know how anxious the times ahead are.
Do you think the police overreacted?
Can I ask you whether you've spoken to Mr.
about
Coulson?
what's happened to Andy Coulson, Rebekah?
What I'm going to do now, and I hope you don't mind, is I can't say too much today. I have to be careful for my former colleagues' sake what I say, but my thoughts are with them, like I said, and their families. But now we're going home.
What's your message to Andy Coulson?
How do you feel about what's happened to Andy Coulson?